Okay, and we are recording. Welcome, everybody. My name is Arley Sorg. I am the co-editor-in-chief at Fantasy Magazine and senior editor at Locus Magazine and a bunch of other stuff. And we're here to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and similar games, whatever else comes up. With me, I have some really awesome people. So first of all, everybody, big surprise before we get going. Everybody roll for initiative. I'm serious. Grab a die, a 20-sided die. If you don't have one, go to Google and type in roll a die. And then right-click the 6-sided die that you throw away, and then click the 20-sided die to roll it.
I have a bag right here.
Everybody
My bag is in the other room.
13 different die sets. I wish I had known. Okay.
Yeah, seriously. You could have told us. I would have busted out the big sparkly dice.
I know, yeah.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. I guess it's kind of like combat, right? You're like, surprise.
Right. It's a surprise round.
You're the DM who always ends up with a TPK, aren't you?
I have done it once. Yeah. Okay, what's everybody's roll?
So, you know, I feel like I probably don't have an initiative bonus, but like I don't. Okay.
No bonuses. We won't go there because that involves
that requires math.
What's your dex?
Yeah. Right, I know. I mean, it just requires figuring it out. I mean, back in the day, I had some decks because I definitely played a lot of basketball and stuff, and so I'm like, okay, yeah, I have some decks, certainly. I mean, like being able to shoot a 3-pointer or whatever, that requires decks. It must, you know. I mean, it's a ranged attack, right? So, but I definitely I'm old now, and I haven't played in a long time. I'm sure my dex is terrible. What?
It's zero.
Yeah.
Just a 10.
Yeah. I mean, actually, it's probably like low enough that I would have a negative, so it's probably like at least like 8, you know. So it's like I would have -1 to this roll. So I'm gonna say I have a -1 on my next one. So I have a 5.
Okay, 5.
I also have a 5.
Oh, okay.
You have a 5,
but no modifiers. So.
I rolled an 8.
Nice.
Which shouldn't be that much of a flex, but.
Yeah.
Compared to what just happened. Yeah.
I actually rolled an 8 also, which seems pretty mediocre, which is totally in line with most of my rolls. So accurate.
Now we need the
let's
decks.
start with Lynn. Lynn, please introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lynn Thomas. I'm the co-editor-in-chief and co-publisher of Uncanny magazine. Behold the Space Unicorn.
I should have done that. Trevor.
I'm Trevor Quachri. I'm the editor of Analog Science Fiction, and it's coming up on 10 years. I just realized like yesterday.
Oh my God, it's been that long! Wow.
I know. I still feel like I'm like brand new and still learning, which is nice. It's rough, but
yeah.
To be clear for everybody who is watching this later, that's 10 years for Trevor's run as editor.
Right.
Analog's been around forever.
Yeah. Thank you.
Terese.
Hi, my name is Terese. I'm the co-editor-in-chief of Augur magazine, and we're based in Toronto, Canada.
Nice. And John.
Hi, I'm John Joseph Adams. I'm the editor of Lightspeed magazine and the series editor of Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, and a bunch of other stuff. And I love Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, this whole thing is my scheme to get John to do another video. He's like,
yeah.
Okay, so let's start with a really nerdy question. Tell me briefly about one of your all-time favorite characters you ever played and what you like most about that character. Lynn, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I played in a fairly long campaign with friends in Connecticut. I played a paladin named Claire.
Ooh.
And she was paladin of Paylor. She had a very, very, very high charisma and a very, very, very low intelligence. And I basically played her like Barbie with a mission, and I had so much fun. So much fun.
Nice. What about you?
I love playing a dummy, you know, like, you know, just a lovable dummy who just wanders around doing stupid stuff all the time.
I mean,
so much fun.
She was basically a tank who could charm you into pretty much anything, but what she was charming you into was invariably a very bad idea.
But she is lawful good, right?
Yeah, she is lawful good. So it was a bad idea that made perfect sense from a lawful good perspective. But if you were someone who was a critical thinker, it wasn't going to work so well.
That's like the best character a DM could hope to have a player play.
You would think so?
Yeah.
But I have a really good story about that for later. So
I feel like decision paralysis is sometimes such an issue at the table that having the dummy character who just goes, I don't know, I touch
kick in the door.
Right, exactly. You're like, keep it rolling. Awesome.
Right.
That's a decision paralysis is a really good point. That's not on my questions list, but we should talk about it because that is like that can be really difficult to get around sometimes. It's
interesting. Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting if you like watch Critical Role, because it's like they get into that big time, and like some of the players are just like they get so frustrated. Like, I mean, Travis has actually done it too, but like Travis like is the most likely to be like, can we just go already? You know, and so yeah, and I mean, I've been there in games too, so.
I had this friend named Doug that I used to play with all the time, and he played this one character who was just very impulsive. So he would roll a die, as his behind-the-scenes thought process. And if he rolled it a certain way, it's just like, you know what, I'm just going to kill this guy. Which made it really fun, but really frustrating sometimes.
Yeah.
What about you, Trevor? Favorite character of all time?
I think one of my favorite characters is one I'm actually playing right now, who we're working, the campaign is the 5th edition Strahd Ravenloft thing.
Ooh,
so
I'm
trying
doing that.
Oh, nice.
Awesome. All right, then I won't talk about any potential spoilers, but I decided to play a barbarian, and the way I kind of tried to theme him thematically for the more gothic setting was I basically riffed on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Oh. So I get to sort of run two different characters. I get to run the sort of polite, more nebbishy Dr. Simon Harlow, and then I also get to embody the sort of angry, confident rage monster version. So I get to play two characters, which actually is a lot of fun. Granted, I probably don't play either one that well, so combined, it's still only the equivalent of one good character. But I've just been having a ton of fun with that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that for a barbarian. That's perfect.
Especially for that setting.
Yeah. Well done, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, Terese, what about you?
Yes, I also think that one of my favorite characters is a character I'm currently playing. I'm in two different campaigns. So one is Curse of Strahd, and another one is a homebrew campaign that sort of my DM came up with. I'm playing a sorcerer, and I like to play magic people because I love spells. I will spend like hours just looking through the lists of D&D spells because I'm like, so cool. Like, what situations will I use? Could I use the spell? And then I'm like, oh, it's for wizards. Damn it, I can't even access it. So this character is so in this campaign we're doing like every character. It's very anime style, so every character gets their own arc. So it's my arc right now.
Nice.
We've discovered I'm a chosen one character, so I'm like, main character. Yeah. So this character is very much like the sheltered princess trope who's just going into the world now. Has a lot of book smarts, not very low wisdom, like very low wisdom. Mid intelligence, very high charisma. Can politician's daughter, can do all that stuff. Doesn't maybe know that you shouldn't go off with shady people or tell everyone your whole business. Maybe don't do that. So it's great to play her, and everyone has to sort of wrangle and be like, don't go down that alley. Don't. But I have to help a small person with a cat. It's like, no, don't do that. It's not helpful. So that's quite fun.
I feel like your character and Lynne's character would be like the
best friends.
You would start out bickering a lot, right? And then you'd have that arc in the anime show where you end up being really, really tight friends at the end.
Yeah, totally.
And like, it's one of those ends up making everybody cry when they watch the show kind of thing,
We would help in, persuading. I have like +10 persuasion.
Yeah.
So let's go around. Like, I agree with your bad idea. That's a great idea. I love that.
But everybody still loves him, you know.
Yep.
High charisma. Everybody goes, all right, what are you gonna do?
What about you, Jean? Jean Jose?
Yeah, I mean, I have to go with a current character as well. And for me, it's like largely because I've like leveled up as a player so much over the last several years. Like, I mean, since starting playing 5e and playing online, like all my games are online. And like I had different players who were like people from publishing and stuff, and so it's like, and these people who were like uh like really into the role playing aspect, and so like that brought that out of me, and so that sort of really transformed how I play and how much I obsess about D&D. But so one of my characters is a turtle druid. We're playing in Ghost of Saltmarsh, and I basically, he talks like Slingblade kind of, and well, I mean, a lot like Slingblade. I mean, I love Slingblade. I'm not making fun of Slingblade in any way. I love that movie. I love the character, and so anyway, but in this game, we all have like a special magic item that gives some benefits, and it like levels up with us and stuff. And so one of my concerns had been that, like, well, if I'm wild shaped, I can't talk to anybody or whatever. And so the DM just allowed my item to let me have telepathy, right? And so when I turn into like a monster or like a beast, he likes turning into dinosaurs, because like Deinonychus is one of the things that you can turn into very early as a moon druid. And so he'll turn into a dinosaur. He'll be like, hey, everybody, it's me, Wanderfar. I'm a dinosaur now. And so that's fun. And then sometimes, it comes up in other situations too. And sometimes he tries to use his telepathy to like intimidate an enemy. He's not good at it though. But it's like he'll be like, he'll like be a giant octopus or whatever. It's like, I'm the giant octopus, and I'm the god, and comes up with some name or whatever. And it's just a lot of fun, and he's a big dummy too. So also he's got like a real sad energy, because it's like he's instead of like how it's as written, turtles like live a fairly short time, which seems really dumb, because it's like tortoises live a long ass time. So it's like, I talked to my DM and we agreed, like, okay, so turtles gonna be like long lived. And so I'm like, so I decided, okay, so he lost his partner a long time ago, and he's basically been mourning ever since, and he's been going all around the world for like 50 years. And so his name's Wanderfar, and I don't know if I said that, but so he has an actual turtle name that he was born with, but then after he lost his partner, he wandered all over the world based on something his partner had said. And then so he eventually wandered all across Faerun, and then Ghost of Saltmarsh takes place in Greyhawk. So he wandered, like, he spent all these years wandering around Faerun, and then he sort of wandered through a portal somewhere and ended up in Greyhawk, just because like the DM had said, like, you can make your characters from whatever world, whatever, and we'll figure out a way to bring them to Greyhawk. And so I'm like, all right, I'm the only one who ended up doing it, but I thought it was fun. But so anyway, that's Wanderfar.
I know this is directly counter to what you sort of portrayed, but I like the idea of a turtle druid who is filled with wanderlust and has been wandering the world for 50 years and has actually only made it 30 miles.
Yeah. Well, there's so many interesting critters to talk to along the way. I mean, it could really slow you down. And he does love talking to a critter.
Ooh, yeah, love talking to. I asked my DM, like, what are NPCs' last names? Because my character will talk to everybody. She will talk to she will talk to everybody. She's made several friends this way, and like several contacts. We go to a shopkeeper, and she's like, so like, how did you come to own the shop? Like, this is really nice. And my DM's like, why? Like, she's interested in a person. She's not just here to buy stuff. Like, what's their story? So that's my mischief.
Yeah, nice.
A couple of things came up that I really want to track back to, even though they were on my original set. But like, one thing that came up is because I have a friend, my friend's brother, who he's really into min-maxing. Which people who don't know means that he crunches the stats. He's really into the numbers, making the most powerful characters possible. And he's really into, like, he's not as into the role play. He's like, let's just get to the die roll. Action. I'm going to do this. Whereas my other friend, you know, we're really into the role playing. We'll make long, elaborate backgrounds for our characters. Where do you all fall in this? Like, how important is role play versus non-role play? Do you really get into role playing the characters? Do you do voices? Do you fall somewhere in between? Or are you more like, you know, let's just get to the stats, let's get to the die roll, what happens next, let's keep it moving? Like, where do you fall? How about you, Lynn? Let's start with you.
I am very much a role play person. I mean, I did community theater as a teenager, so like that was how you got me into gaming in the first place. I mean, my very first attempt at D&D ever was a 2nd edition campaign that was being run by the owner of the local comic shop that we went to in Connecticut when we lived there, which he just invited us like at random, and I was the only woman there. And it was a bunch of min-maxers, and they convinced me that I could be Xena Warrior Princess. That didn't go so well, because it turns out that in 2nd edition, when you throw a chakram, it does not come back. And it was basically an entire party of min-maxers, and every time I tried to roleplay at all, it just didn't go very well. So we ended up sort of wandering off from that campaign after a couple of attempts, but same comic shop owner was like, oh, no, I know what to do with you two. And brought Michael and I back to his other role-playing group, which was a group of teachers and librarians, all married couples, who all were there for the role play. So they were either dating or married, and like we had an absolute blast, and that was where Claire came from, and we did other campaigns where I had, like, I was a druid who shapeshifted into a cat, and would, like, anytime we were traveling, I would just shapeshift into a cat and hop into someone's backpack because inherently lazy. Really dangerous terrain. Okay, you can just carry me. Like, I loved that. We had so much fun. But yeah, I'm here for the role play aspect. The numbers are there to disappoint me in my role play, basically. Because the dice hate me. They always have. I have one story of a glorious set of dice rolls that I have dined out on for now almost 15 years, because that was the last time the dice were kind to me. So
nice. Trevor, what about you?
I'd say I mean, this is probably not a super exciting answer, but I fall somewhere sort of in the middle. You know, I find that the thing that drives me is character concept and character creation. Like, I'm the person who will be somewhat drifting off from whatever character I'm currently playing, because I've already thought of the next 3 I want to play. Like, I just want to get into the building and the playing, and it's not entirely about the numbers. It's not entirely about being able to do something with them dramatically. It's a little bit of both. I like when there's some convergence there. And I find that also when I play a character, they evolve over time so much. So sometimes my initial concept in practice becomes something very different at the table over sessions also. So I guess the advantage, I guess maybe that is advantage to being role player. You know, in the end, maybe it does win out slightly a little bit.
Yeah, but it sounds like you really get into the imagination aspect of it.
Yeah, and I neither end would work without the other for me, because sometimes you want a character who is good at what they do, but sometimes the concept of the character is they're not necessarily the best X, because how many of those are you going to really want to play in your time? Sometimes you want the guy who's just, you know, average, just okay, or maybe not even great. Maybe he'll get better later. Who knows? You know, but those are the things that are interesting. And sometimes you want the mechanics to support that the character is good at something, and sometimes you don't.
Nice. Terese, what about you?
I think that I thought I would be a min-maxer, like when I sort of started playing D&D, but I've become more of, like, also like Trevor, kind of in between. I think I really get into roleplay when I'm really invested in the story. Like, one of the stories, or the kinds of stories that I really like, are mysteries. So I'm like, I like to solve things. I like to, like, look around for clues, pending, you know, dice rolls and how high my investigation is. I want to ask questions and, like, get really into sort of, like, the meat of the story. And I bother my DMs a lot, because I'm like, but, like, what does this mean? And they're like, it's not important. And I'm like, but I want to know what this means. And I also enjoy creating characters that are kind of, you know, deep and like layered. And as I play the character more, I sort of discovered like how many layers there are in general. Because I'm also coming from the perspective of like D&D as a writer, as someone who writes fantasy. So I'm like, oh, what kind of characters, what kinds of worlds can I, can I come up with and can I, play along with? Like the character I'm playing right now, like I don't like, she's like the sheltered princess trope. She's not good at a lot of things. So like other players would be like, oh, but why can't she do this? I'm like, she's never washed a dish in her life. She doesn't know. She just sits in her room and reads books. And, bad guys took over her city. And now she's kind of like, I can't go back home. And how does she deal with that? And so that's all very fun. When it comes to combat, I do like to be strategic. Like I want to make sure that I know the spells. My character right now is like the primary or the most powerful spellcaster on the team. So I'm like, okay, it's kind of my job to make sure that like I know the spells I have and I know what kind of things to like ask to roll for so I can learn more about the enemies that I'm facing and how can I use what I have to sort of beat this like bad guy or whatever. So I'm very pointed when it comes to that. Like I love combat because I can be strategic. I have plan A, plan C, plan B, all the plans. But I go really hard, but like that's kind of my approach.
You mentioned earlier that you are playing Strahd. Do you feel like Strahd really scratches that itch where you were saying that you love mystery and that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. In the Strahd campaign, I'm playing a monk. There was a point where we went to Strahd's castle and then we couldn't use our weapon because I had a short sword. I'm like, what am I gonna do? And then I'm like, I'm a monk. What? I can just punch things. That's
I am a weapon.
I am a weapon. So that was fun. There are lots of different like places that we can go within that campaign, and like we have a long list of like side quests we started but then got distracted by something else. And then the list just keeps getting longer of like mysteries we have to solve that we just, got distracted with and started something new. So that's fun. That definitely scratches that itch.
Nice. What about you, John?
Yeah. So, I mean, I love both aspects of it. I can't even say that I'm like somewhere in the middle because I'm like 10 out of 10 in both areas, and like to a ridiculous extent. I mean, when you asked the question, I opened up my D&D Beyond list of characters because I was like, okay, look, I have 2,323 characters in D&D Beyond. So now I need to explain that most of these are not like real characters. I mean, there's only a handful that are characters I've ever played. A bunch of them are just like sort of stubs where I started messing around with some idea and be like, oh, let me try to build this. And then a bunch of them are like copies of my existing characters because I'm like, well, what if I level up this way? And it's just easier to do that because then I'll have to change everything back or whatever. But still, I think about it a lot. Okay. I will say I prefer not to use the term min-max because it has all these negative connotations. Like if you read Reddit and stuff, I say what I do is optimize, just because it's like, because it's for me. It's not because of whatever anybody else is going to say, like, oh, this is the most powerful this or that. But it's like, what am I going to, what am I going to be happy playing with? Like if I'm not good at the thing that the character's built for, or if I'm not like, I don't have like the highest stat that I can achieve for the character, that's suited to the character, like I'll be frustrated when I'm playing because it's like, I missed by one. If I just optimized this, the quote unquote right way, it's like I would have hit, and everybody hates missing, right? I mean, it's like, sure, it's part of the game and everything, and it can come up with interesting narrative things, but it's like, but you want to hit things, you want to beat the monsters, so I do spend a lot of thought process on that, but then like I was saying earlier, it's like I've gotten really into character development and everything, and it's like I at this point it's like I can't make a character and not figure out a voice to do for it, and then do a voice whenever I'm talking as a character. And I don't have like a huge range, so it's been a real hassle for me because it's like, okay, I already obsess to a ridiculous degree anytime I'm making a new character about the backstory, about my different like optimization choices, and just in terms of like, oh, what skills am I going to pick, whatever, all that stuff. And then it's like, now I got to figure out voices too, and it's like, I'm not a voice actor, there's only so many things I can do. But anyway, so yeah, that's That's how I go. Oh, and Terese, I thought it was interesting, by the way, when you're talking about tactics or strategy, because it was like you said plan A, plan C, and plan B. So I'm like, aha, surprise plan B. You didn't even see the plan B coming. That was an interesting strategy. I love it.
I need to get them all to move in a line so I can hit them with lightning.
Yes,
okay, just move all of you real quick. Yeah, it's like lightning, but then they're all in water, so then more people get hit by lightning. Technically, that's how lightning works. Technically, so yeah.
Nice. I get really involved in writing backgrounds for my characters, like deeply involved.
Yeah.
Nice.
I will say, speaking of backgrounds, I don't want to like. I mean, this is a ridiculous flex, but I love background so much, or backstory so much, that I rewrote the lyrics to Baby Got Back to be Baby Got Backstory. And I posted this on Reddit. I thought it was amazing. I feel like it didn't get enough love. So if anybody's watching this and you're like, I too love big backstories, go check it out. I think you would enjoy it if you are, old enough to have appreciated Baby Got Back in the day. But whatever.
Hugo eligible.
What's that?
Nice.
I love you so much.
The other thing that was mentioned was homebrew, and I was really curious. How do y'all feel about homebrew campaigns versus modules, pre-made campaigns? Like, do you love playing homebrew? Do you love building homebrew? I don't know if you also DM or only play. Or are you really more into the modules because the modules are structured a certain way or for whatever reasons? How do y'all feel about homebrew versus modules and pre-made campaigns? Anybody?
Oh. I like the homebrew that I'm in right now as a player. I feel like it's, oh my God, I see a cat. I'm so excited.
There's a cattail.
There's a cattail. I like playing, I think, in homebrew because I don't have to come up with any of the world. And as someone who gets really obsessed with world building, I'm very annoying. My DM is very annoyed. I'm like, we're sending letters, but how does the postal system work? Like, are there addresses? How are we getting, like, I'm this person. So if I were to create a whole world, nothing would happen because my brain would lag and then nothing would happen. I think it becomes really interesting when, like, I guess, at least in my campaign, when we talk about like what things work in universe versus like, the like regular, I guess, standard D&D. Because in my campaign right now, there are certain, like, even certain classes that just don't exist. Like monks don't exist. Wizards don't exist because they break the game, apparently. What? Let me use gears. No, but... or even like technology, where our homebrew is like a science fantasy kind of thing. But I also appreciate, like, as someone who hasn't been playing for very long, I've only been playing for about 4 years. I appreciate like the modules and the sort of the set campaigns or the set one shots, because it allows me to sort of understand like this D&D world that was already made. Because sometimes I get a little bit insecure about like, oh, I don't really know a lot about this or that or all these realms or all these creatures. And if there are already sort of things that are already published or made that I can just interact with, I feel like that's what I can feel the most confident as like a new-ish player.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Nice.
I like guidelines. Yeah.
I've played both, and I think the thing that I appreciate about homebrew setups is the ability to pivot. When the party decides to drag you in a direction that you weren't necessarily expecting, you can just sort of start throwing up scenery and seeing what happens. But I have been mostly in groups where the number of people who could run a game in DM was limited because a lot of us just didn't have the bandwidth to put something together. So modules came in very handy for I'm happy to run a thing, but I really can't build something from scratch, folks. The drawback to modules that we found with our group, and we were playing like 3.5, like all of my D&D experience is now at least 10 years old. I am very much out of date, but we were playing, and I'm blanking on it. It was a steampunk set of modules and world building from D&D around 3.5.
Like Eberron?
Eberron. Yes, we were playing Eberron. Thank you. I could not remember the name of it because, as I said, 10 to 15 years old. My brain is goo at this point. We were playing Eberron, and there was one particular module writer where every time we were in one of his modules, we all died, like invariably. And it was like we had this refrain in our gaming group, which was "Curse you, name of writer of this module," because like no matter what module, like we played something like 5 or 6 different modules, but the 2 that guy wrote killed us TBK every single time. Like we couldn't figure out how to make good choices in his version of world building. And it got really frustrating because it was like, oh, well, yeah, yep, we're dead. Okay, here I go. I guess I'm playing a rogue now. All right. Like it was frustrating because there wasn't wiggle room for the DM to be able to recover from bad dice, bad choices, whatever, within the strictures of those particular modules. Right. And I think that's sort of one of the drawbacks is when it's that rigid and it's trying to shove you that hard in a specific direction. And there's only one way to win, which is kind of what it felt like. You know, I don't play video games. So for me, it felt much more like being in like my perception of what a video game is like, where there's one narrative that you have to follow. And the side quests always drag you back to that narrative. And the goal is to win the narrative. And that's just not my jam. So
nice.
Yeah, I've played in both. I really enjoy both. I sort of for a long time had this perception that modules were like, well, I guess because I had like one DM who I played with for a long time who was very down on modules. Like he didn't like them at all, and like so he only ran homebrew. And so I kind of had this perception that the modules were not great. But then once I started playing in 5e, I mean, basically, most of my DMs were running modules. I mean, the first bunch of them, yeah, it's like the first several games I played were all, just running for modules. And I mean, I had a ton of fun on all of them. And it's like, I mean, there's always, I think most of the 5e modules anyway, I didn't play, I didn't play 3 or 3.5 at all. It was a very dark time in my life where I didn't play any D&D whatsoever. But I don't know how those modules were, but like I feel like in the 5e ones, there's enough room that, or at least a DM who's confident enough to pivot or whatever, like to do other things that doesn't feel like you're too tied into one narrative or another. But again, it's like a lot of that, like, you got to be really on your toes to be able to like navigate it. Like when a player is trying to like do something that's like not really what's in the module, and it's like, some modules I think are easier to navigate than others. Like where they have like it's like a sandbox where it's like, oh well, you could do any of these things, but then it's like, well, but is the party level to do that thing? They could go do it, but they're gonna get killed, And so it's like, well, you need some kind of not rails, because like I don't know, like railroading is like a bad term in this discussion, but it's like something that can at least like kind of guide them,
like guide rails in a bowling alley.
Yes, right. yes. Like, okay, that way that's a gutter. Okay, no, that's a gutter. You don't want to do that. But yeah, so but yeah, I love both. One of my games is the DM is running a not a homebrew setting, but a homebrew adventure of a set in Eberron, and she's doing all kinds of cool things with like some custom, like, so our whole party is we're all Warforged, and we're all like special Warforged. We're like, we're not like a stock Warforged. We've been modified, and so we also have like not like a magic item, but we have like a built-in component to us that levels with us, and we get like a new thing each time. And so like we're basically like gods walking the earth. And so that's been really cool because like we're investigating all these different elements of the world building, and of course Eberron is actually built in this really interesting way where there was the Morning, which destroyed the nation of Siri or Sire, depending on what DM you have. But and Keith Baker left it very purposely vague to be like, okay, well, no, the DM and the players will determine like what is the cause of the Morning. And so like I love that. And I just edited this anthology of essays on world building for Kobold Press. So the Kobold Guide to World Building is what it's called. And so that was one of the things that actually Rajan, who Arley and I played in a game with, Rajan Khanna, he wrote an essay sort of about that idea of leaving space in world building to allow the creative collaboration to happen. So that's the thing that I really love about homebrew, is that it does lend more to that, because
you can
the
actually
DM's
have
making
an
it up.
impact on the world.
Yeah.
I feel
Well,
like
Trevor didn't get to.
No, it's okay.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll go to Trevor in one sec. I feel like
Yeah.
to what you were saying, I forget exactly what it was, but I feel like our Strahd campaign that we played.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, was really like that, where it felt very sandboxy, and it felt very like, well, you could go do this, but you might die, and you don't know if this is way beyond your level or not.
Right.
And there were several times in that campaign where we were like, I don't think we should mess with these people just yet.
Yeah.
Trevor.
Yeah, figuring out how to navigate the danger spots in a more sandboxy campaign is probably the number one thing to figure out. That there's nobody there to calculate. Go, oh, okay, is this an appropriate challenge rating? Is this whatever? That's just if you walk into it, you're on your own. Remember that running away is an option.
Yeah.
But to piggyback off of something that Lynn said, I the time constraint of doing so much world building imposes just like a practical penalty on so much of it, that personally I like homebrew settings, because you get to do really creative, imaginative stuff that's outside of D&D and similar have a few sort of stock fantasy, and sometimes they get creative. There's Ravenloft, there's Spelljammer, there's Planescape, Dark Sun, but a lot of times these things are just kind of stock fantasy, and I like people, particularly in the circles that that we all seem to run with, being able to go hog wild and come up with their own stuff. On the other hand, actually building a dungeon and populating it and doing all of that work is a lot of work. It's intensive. So usually when I run, I do kind of a mixture. So I do a more homebrewed setting, but I cannibalize modules and products and things like that. So even sometimes the context will be totally different. But yes, I am lifting that map. Yes, I am lifting those encounters. And sometimes if you reskin it a little bit, players may not even recognize, even if they've played through it before, in a different game or somebody else's campaign. Sometimes you can be like, yeah, that actually was something you're familiar with, but you didn't recognize because the trolls were all giant leech monsters now or whatever.
Nice. Yeah,
that's really cool. I never thought about that. Oh, that's great.
That's
good, like in between. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, particularly if you're new to the game, I think it is good to use pre-existing modules, because it takes a while to get a sense of what's fair, what's not fair. It's just trying to jump in both feet with something homebrew. Like, I mean, I'm sure I did it back in the day, but and I'm also sure it was a disaster. And if I wasn't in high school, I think people would have been like, this is not a good game.
And when you're doing that, like, you're doing it as a high schooler who has all kinds of time on their hands, as opposed to opposed to an adult who has like responsibilities and jobs and and people and pets that you have ongoing relationships with who wish to see you on occasion. So I think that one of the reasons we ended up with a lot more modules in our campaigns was because of the time factor, because as much fun as our DMs were having building world stuff, like plotting out a combat takes a lot of time and energy. And the modules make that a much faster process so that you can actually get to the part where you're playing.
Every time I think about, because like my one like tiny goal / dream in D&D is just like eventually DM something, but my instinct is to go homebrew, and I'm like, Terese, you could just write a fantasy novel. All that you can just all that energy that you're gonna take, you're gonna invest. You can just write it's gonna take the same amount of energy and time. You can just do that, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe I start with models and then I work my way to homebrew.
Allow me to propose both plan that what you just proposed. So you write a fantasy novel, or you create the world for your fantasy novel. You set a campaign in that world, thus flushing out your fantasy world to make it even better for your fantasy novel. And so you just sort of you draw the you do the world building. It's like, oh, I'm going to write a fantasy novel in this world, and you get the bones down, and then you get your players in there, and then together you explore it, and then you're like, oh, I didn't even know that that's what this place was or whatever, and then you're playing D&D but also writing.
Yeah, there are actually
you.
a number of major authors whose books were founded on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not D&D, but like the Expanse started from a role playing game that they were playing together, and all the world building and everything started from that. And so it's like that's been a huge book series and television series and everything. There I feel like there's this negative connotation of like, oh, like you adapted your role playing game into the story or whatever, but it's like like, yeah, that's because a lot of people did that who like weren't writers, and they just like turned their backstory stuff into like a story, and like they just didn't know what they were doing, and they weren't really committed to writing, and I think that's why we have this negative connotation, because it's like there's no reason that like a really awesome like backstory or like world building thing that you do for D&D couldn't be turned into an awesome story or novel or whatever, like so yeah.
Well, and when you've got players who are going to mess with your
world
building, you're going to learn a lot of things about human nature that will surprise you in terms of how non-linear things can be. Like in the same way that we often will point at like narratives where it's like, oh, no human would have made that choice. It's like, no, seriously, this player totally made that choice in the game, and this is the outcome. And like, especially if like bad decision making theater is your jam as a writer, like your players can do a lot of that plot based work for you.
Oh, excellent. So
let me make terrible choices and see what happens.
Okay. It also, you have the advantage of if you have invested players like Terese, who when you set up your world will actually ask you, so how does the postal service work here? And you go, you know what, that's a great question, actually. I should figure that out.
You don't have to take N.K. Jameson's world building class. You can just play D&D.
Oh my god, because I'm a writer, I'm playing a character who really loves books. Whenever I pick up a book, I'm like, this book implies the existence of a book publisher. So there are book publishers in your homebrew. What are there? Book editors? Are there fantasy literary agents? Explain.
Right. Yeah, actually,
I don't get an explanation.
That's an angle right there. You got to do something with that.
I ran Waterdeep Dragon Heist for a group, and it like went okay, and like I was really loving it for a while, but like I'm so obsessive that it's really hard to like stop working on it. And it's like, and I rewrote so much of it, I'm like, ugh, why did I do this? Why did I play a module and then like rewrite it? That's actually harder than just making something up. But anyway, so it didn't go that great, and so eventually I ended it, and so but I had these plans for like what would happen beyond. And so like Volo, it like gets the party started on that adventure, and my PCs, they hated Volo. They're like, this guy, because it's like there's like a moment early on where it's like, look, he rewards you fine, it's just not what he really originally promised. Like, oh, like, come on, like he did you right, but anyway, so I thought like a fun thing could be like, well, either Volo gets murdered in the yawning portal and the party then has to solve who murdered Volo, or we could do like or first we could do that later. We could do Volo comes to the party because some nefarious publisher has absconded with his publishing rights to his latest book and is refusing to pay him royalties, and he needs some heroes to go sort that out for him. And so I thought that would be kind of fun.
So because everybody an RPG where everybody's playing members of the Sifwa Grief Con.
Exactly. Yeah, because I mean my players are all writers,
but it's too real. It's supposed to be a fantasy game.
Right.
It's very triggering for some people.
Paid in quarters, like the advance.
Yeah,
I would get depressed.
Right. Well, just real quick. Sorry. So Trevor said running is always an option. It's true, but I absolutely would never count on PCs thinking that running is an option. Even if you say so, even if you tell them, even if you reiterate it a number of times, players never want to run.
It's cheating if you run.
Yeah, the thing is, like, I feel like Critical Role, like, being as ubiquitous as it is, like, I feel like that is teaching a good lesson that, hey, sometimes you actually should run, and it's totally viable, because like they run a fair amount of time, like a surprising amount really for a party, but it's interesting, and yeah, but parties that I'm in, like, nobody ever wants to run, even when it's like, no, really, guys, I don't know if we can handle it. Okay, we're going. Yep, all right. But anyway,
in that Strahd campaign we ran a couple times, but it took terrible things happening to us at least once first. And running was always decision paralysis. Like, it took us a really long time to decide to run. Yeah.
Can I just say real quick? One of my favorite moments in that game was not when we were running, but when a string of terrible things had happened to my character. So we were fighting like a homebrew thing that our DM brought in that was like some kind of like, there's like a room with, well, I don't want to give spoilers, but we were fighting this like crazy monster that he brought in from outside, right? And so I was a paladin, and I was positioned where I was like, okay, I'm positioned where I can attack it in melee, and I'm gonna like lock it down to keep it from hurting the rest of the party. So like, I'm a paladin of Lathander. I rolled to attack. I rolled a natural 1. All right, and I have Polearm Master, and I was like high enough level, so I had 2 attacks from Polearm Master, and I had my bonus action attack, right? So I'm like, I have 3 attacks. All right, so I rolled a natural 1. Second attack, I rolled a natural 1, and then so I'm like, what the fuck? And so, or no, actually, after the first natural 1, I literally, like, role playing, I'm like, call on Lathander. I'm like, Lathander, give me power. Like, 'cause we're getting our asses kicked, right? And so, roll a natural 1. And then I think I called on Lathander again, and it's like, no, Lathander, really, listen, we're gonna die. I need your help. And I rolled the third natural 1. And like, we were playing on Roll20, and it was doing the thing where it always rolled the 2 dice, like in case you had advantage or disadvantage. And on one of them, it was like 2 natural 1s. And I'm like,
there's nothing for you.
But it was fun because then I actually did like a brief, like, we didn't have like a lot of arc space in that game, but I did like a little arc with my character where like he felt like he was forsaken by Lathander, and so he like lost his faith. And we didn't do anything with it mechanically. He was still a paladin, but yeah, I just thought that was fun. And then there was like a cool moment where it's like I was like, oh no, this is the moment where it can be restored, and it was very like, I just got chills thinking about it again, because I was like, oh no, that was perfect. And the DM rolled with it real well. So yeah, so that was cool.
I don't mean to portray myself as a role-playing coward, but even as a DM, I have to advocate for all of the advantages of players being able to run, because there's tactical enjoyment of, the benefits of everybody having to get to the wizard to teleport them out. Everybody going, oh my god, I got to clear this room and get over there so we can escape. There's so many role-playing opportunities. The rogue who's like, I'm not a tough guy, but I survive because I leave. Versus, the paladin who, and I actually had a paladin in a 3.0 game who basically held the narrow bridge for the rest of the party and died. And I was like, that was the most paladin thing to do, because paladin's not going to retreat. Paladin's going to go see you in the afterlife. And block and make everybody start doling out attacks of opportunity. And of course she died, but that's how it goes. But there's a lot of good stuff in the opportunity to retreat, let's say, if you want to put a braver, more heroic face on that. Tactical retreat,
yes.
Yeah.
That makes it sound much braver. Yeah.
Going back to some stuff that Lynn was talking about, for y'all, in your own opinions, do you feel like, especially because probably writers are going to watch this, do you feel like writers can benefit from playing games like D&D, maybe even editors for that matter? Are there things that people in the writing field can get from playing these games? What do you guys think?
Well, sure. I mean, I think one of the major things you can get from playing role-playing games, in addition to, bad decision-making theater and just having a group of 5 people who you can't predict what choices they're going to make breaking the thing you carefully set up. You know, which is great for actual writing purposes, because the most interesting writing doesn't choose the most obvious choice that is next in the plot. It chooses the thing that nobody thought of, but actually is perfectly natural if you think about it in terms of how things are seeded. You know, it's the curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal thing. Like we get excited when something unexpected happens that actually was completely seeded at the front end of the story. And having 5 players run amok in the thing that you put together is a very good way to achieve that. But the other thing is, like, it forces you to a certain extent to think about a lot of the structural issues that happen in writing. So when you think about world building, you think about characterization, you think about plot structure and pacing. Those are all things that I think come out of a gaming experience that can be really beneficial for writers. You know, just in the sense of, like, being reminded that characters do have to actually rest or they die. Being reminded that, you know, horses are not meat motorcycles, and they require maintenance and food and rest. Being reminded that, you know, your magic users cannot deplete themselves to the point where they just expire on the spot, and that they have limitations. And that, you know, the choices that you make in your world building have to have some structure to them. They have to have some sense to them. And that, you know, yes, it's fun to play a bunch of gods walking around, but it's more fun if you earn it before you get there. Like I was in a group that did sort of a riff on Spelljammers, where we started off basically as gods, and it ended up being kind of boring because there was no moment of crisis where you were like, crap, I really should consider running. It was always like, oh, I'm going to just nuke this from orbit, you know, like, and like feeling that kind of power consistently without any threat to it, I think ended up not being great for the storytelling. Because it was just like, well, I can totally handle anything that they throw at us. And we never got to a point where we had that crisis of faith, where we had that moment of, oh crap, I have chosen poorly. But that, I think, is one of the big things that makes characters interesting. Like, you know, when you're building a character and a plot and a world as a writer, what makes those things interesting is the failure modes. Because if your character never fails, then there's nothing at stake. And the stakes always come out at that failure point. And then what truly makes characters fascinating and likable and interesting is how they recover from that failure mode. And I think that, you know, the first time you go through a TPK as a new person, that warps you in certain ways that I think end up making folks better at considering those crisis points as writers.
Nice. Just for people who are watching who might not know, TPK is total party kill.
Yeah.
When everybody, all the players die, and the game is over. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, I totally agree with Lynn. Like, I'm fine. I'm sort of like falling in love with like the fantasy genre, like all over again as I go through these worlds and play these characters. And I agree about the like characters who can fail or who can make the wrong decisions and learning from that. Like, I like playing a character who is very naive, and he's like, well, of course, why would they lie? Why would they lie? And then is reminded several times that, you know, this is not, you know, your little court of fellow rich people. These are like people who might want to kill you for other reasons. And I like I'm finding the most enjoyment and the most learning as a writer through this kind of characterization. I feel like characterization is the most fun part for me as a writer. Like, I'm not like, I like character and I like plot, like, and world is kind of just like, I'll just make up the world as I go along. But I feel like I should take more, I guess, from the world and world building through D&D, but I'm taking a lot from character as well. Having characters make really tough decisions or being in situations where, like, you know, it's not really my mom is here in the background. But yeah, that's what I really love, and that's something that I hope to do more of, and I hope to investigate and to learn more about. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I agree with Terese. I think that overall gaming on either side of the DM screen is good for writers, but I think it excels particularly for in matters of character and characterization. I wouldn't say it's completely unalloyed. It's 99% positive. There are some pitfalls in that when you're playing, it can be fun to play a stock character. It's fun to play very familiar, recognizable things because we like those things because they're fun. So if you're like, I'm, this, I can't even think of anything off the top of my head, but I'm the lovable rogue or whatever it is. And you just play that to the hilt. It can be a lot of fun, but sometimes you still need to do more than that as a writer. That when you're writing that character, you need to flesh them out in a way that you don't necessarily as a player. And I guess it applies to DMs too, because for example, talking about the Waterdeep heist, doing a fantasy heist is a great thing, but it's also you're playing on these recognizable heist tropes, and players just being in a heist, it's cool to get to do it. But also, how cool is it also to read a collection of recognizable tropes? Less cool, So it's positive, but there is that point where you do have to be a little bit aware.
Nice.
I have to say, I really feel like Waterdeep Dragon Heist, it delivers on Waterdeep. It doesn't deliver on Dragon or Heist, really. Like, it's very lacking in both Dragon and Heist. It's a very...
That's what I heard.
Yeah. It's like, that's one of the reasons why I ended up rewriting so much of it, because I was like, I wanted to put the dragons in Dragon Heist, goddammit, and the heist in Dragon Heist. So like, I tried rejiggering things around to make it like, okay, it's gonna feel like Dragon Heist by the time we get to the end of it, goddammit. Because I played it first, and then I DM'd it. So it's like, when I played it, I was like, where's the dragons? Where's the fucking heist? Oh, sorry, I don't know if we're allowed to swear or whatever.
It's fine.
Whatever. It's on the Lightspeed channel. Whatever. Like, I'll swear.
It's your channel.
Yeah. So, but anyway, no, I totally agree with what everyone's saying. Like, and I think like one of the really cool things is for writers is that like, well, like I feel like as a reader, one of the things you can really helps you grow as a person while reading fiction is that you're reading the points of view of people who are different than you, and so that's one of the reasons why I think like fiction really helps teach people like empathy for others and everything like that. So it's like in a way that like if you don't read fiction or you don't like or you don't like sort of watch or whatever fictional narratives, like you don't get those fictional narratives in your life. It's like I feel like that leads to a person who's much less understanding of people around them, because it's like they're only interacting with the people that they know, and maybe that group is limited. But anyway, for D&D and everything and other role-playing games, like when you make a character, you can make a character that's completely different than you, but then you actually have to role-play as that character. And so I think that sort of forces you into a role as a creator, like in a much different way than just writing that character down in a story. And I mean, if you're a skilled writer, obviously, like, you can just do that and like you're fine. And like, people who are like successful writers, like, yeah, they figured out how to do that. But when you're growing as a writer, I feel like that can be a very useful sort of shortcut to really teaching you all the ways that you have to think about every element of this character. Because like, you're in this situation now, what are you going to do? And so I think that's really interesting. And also I think this was more true in 4E than in 5E's like character building tools, but I feel like there are a lot of like really, really interesting little tools that you can use to build a character, like in terms of like the background, different background things that like I find like it doesn't seem like it should be this helpful, but like I pick a background or something and I start thinking about like why does this character fit into this background, and then like suddenly I have a whole backstory idea, and so it's like it's interesting in that way. Like if you try to contextualize the character that you want to play in whatever campaign you're going to build, and maybe who your party mates are. So I think that's a really interesting sort of creative experience. And outside of D&D, so I'm in a game that's Monster of the Week. It's a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and that was fascinating, the character creation. Now, again, I'm playing with a bunch of writers, but so we're playing in like we're basically doing Gilmore Girls meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer in terms of like the flavor, So like we're this little small town, a bunch of weird shit happens. We're all like people who investigate that stuff, but we also have like weird abilities. So we just did all the world building together, and then but in the rules it actually has all of these amazing things for creating connections between your characters. It's like if you're this class, I don't think they call it class, but like if you're this class, you need to make these connections with one other character, and so we made all these connections, and then as we went through, it's like we just wrote a series Bible for a TV show, and as we play it, it totally feels like a TV show, like to the extent that we were even like, should we be writing this stuff down, guys? Like, yeah. So I mean, it's really interesting. There's a lot of different games out there that like might be better than D&D, for instance, in terms of like if that's your goal, is to like grow as a storyteller or as a creative person. But I mean, D&D is obviously it's the easiest thing to get people to play because it's ubiquitous and people know it. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different options for that kind of thing, and that's one of the things I love about it, and makes me want to play it all the
time. Nice. Well, we're out of time.
Oh, so, no.
Yeah, I know. This has been really fun. Let me ask one last question, and everybody just tell me your thoughts really quickly. What is your favorite thing about D&D or about similar games? What's your favorite thing about these kind of games? Anybody?
So I'm going to tell my one dining out story because it's relevant. My favorite thing with these kinds of things is when you're playing along and you figure out that you just broke the game. Because it ends up often being a very defining moment for the character that you're playing in ways that you might not have gotten to if you hadn't accidentally broken the game. And when it's accidental in particular, as opposed to sort of doing the malicious version of things where you're actively trying to break the game. So this is my dining out story, which is that I was playing Claire the Paladin. She had gained a +4 Vorpal sword through random loot rolling. And the next session we were confronted with a black dragon, which was about 2 levels better than our party really was. And Claire, being the tank of the party, wandered right up to that dragon and was like, "Hiya!" and rolled to attack. Rolled a natural 20, rolled a second natural 20 for double damage, and basically beheaded the dragon. And it was the only thing that the DM had set up for that evening. Because he was convinced that this dragon was so powerful that there was no way we weren't going to spend like 3 hours fighting this dragon.
Right.
And I had rolled top initiative too. So I was literally, I just walked up to it and beheaded the damn thing. It was a glorious moment for my character, but it was also really fun because then the DM, who is a dear friend of ours, like, there was much swearing, of course, and like, you broke the game, but we ended up having a really fun side quest as a group because I had so efficiently dispensed with very large black dragon. So, and that was literally the only time in my entire life that the dice have been kind to me, where I rolled 3 natural 20s in a row. I feel like I should have like enshrined that one D20 in resin and just kept it forever, but I kept using it and it wore off the magic somehow. It then became my literal worst D20. It always betrayed me after that point. It was like you get this one moment of glory and that's it. So.
Nice.
I feel like that was a case study for like if that was 3.5, like that's why in 5e the Vorpal sword says that it doesn't work on creatures that have legendary actions, and so it'd be like, okay, no beheading dragons, guys, come on.
I mean, the original Vorpal sword worked on a dragon, though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you can't
really well.
Right. Hey, look, don't try to apply logic to D&D rules, man. Like that's
true.
I really like, it's very simple. I just really like magic. I think magic is cool. I like reading like how spells work and spell components. And I'm like, oh, like you need these things in order for the spell to work, or you need to like just be this class for the spell to for you to even get the spell. I just like, it's very simple. I just really like magic. I will, if I can play a spellcaster, I probably will. In my Curse of Strahd campaign, I'm playing a monk, and I'm like, oh, like if only you had sending. Like, damn, like, if only you could fly. But yeah, it's my favorite part of D&D.
Nice.
Yeah, nothing makes you appreciate casters like playing a melee character. As a guy who's playing a barbarian now, I'm like, I like hitting stuff, but
Counterspell.
Yeah, exactly. The thing that I think I like the most is just, and it's a broad statement, but I like the creativity. I like that, anybody involved in the game can really start thinking outside the box. And when you do that, there's really nothing else like it. That, as much as, I mean, I like video games, and as much as I like them, though, they can't ever scratch the tabletop role-playing itch, because they are necessarily limited in what you can do and your solutions to things. And sometimes the solution to something is sticking a sharp piece of metal in it, but other times it's an off the cut, somebody's always going to think of something. Somebody's always going to decide to randomly go, you know what, maybe this thing's intelligent, maybe we can talk to it. Or, oh, this thing we're fighting in this room is invisible. Why don't we tip over the bathtub full of blood from the next room? And now, stuff like that. That's just completely, there's no other way to get that kind of like creative, strategic problem solving, and do it in a cooperative way, where somebody comes up with something and somebody else goes, yeah, that's a great idea, we can do the next step. And that to me is like the sweet spot. When that's happening, like tabletop role playing, you're like, yeah, this is it. There's nothing else.
I love Trevor's answer. Like that's I totally agree with that. And then as for me, like just sort of personally as a player, what I really love when I'm playing is being just a goofball, which may not be as apparent to Arley, because we were playing Curse of Strahd together, and I played a paladin, and so it was like I didn't really. One of the things is like I need to like just not play like paladins and stuff like that, because it's like I don't want to be like a brave heroic guy. Like I could be brave and heroic, but I want to be a goofball. Like I don't want to be like noble and shit. Like like that's not fun to me. Like I just want to say stupid things and like make people laugh and stuff while we're playing, and make the people in my party who hate puns groan frequently when I riff on something. So that's what I want to do when I'm playing D&D. So yeah.
Nice. Well,
I love Wanderfar
so
much.
Who makes dad jokes? There's a paladin in my home group who makes dad jokes. God.
That's perfect.
He's dating my character.
It's so right, though. It's so right.
Yeah, exactly. That is exactly. Dad jokes are 100% paladin sense of humor.
Well, this has been really fun, y'all. Thank you very much for joining me. Thanks for your time and energy. And this has been awesome. I'm really glad we did this. Have a great rest of your day. For people who are watching, it's like we started this at 8 a.m. in California, so California time. So, and everybody's everywhere. So, but yeah, have a great rest of the day, and thank you again.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.